So I am Molly Lotz. I'm the Director of Research Training Initiatives in the graduate school and also the Interim Director of Postdoctoral Affairs. Some of you may know Katie M., who is the Assistant Dean for Graduate and Postdoctoral Professional Development, and the Director for Postdoc Affairs is rotating with NSF for the next year at least. So I'm kind of stepping into part of her role during that time. Um, but I'm really excited to talk today about CVs and cover letters as part of this workshop series on putting together your faculty job application. Because I really think that the CV and the cover letter are kind of the foundation of your application. Obviously, you should be spending time and care on all aspects of your application because they represent who you are as a scholar as you go out on the job market. But if there is a place to kind of lean in more, I would say the CV and the cover letter is where you really want to put the majority of your time and attention, because those are the documents that search committees will really be using heavily to kind of figure out whether you're a strong candidate for a faculty role. So today we're going to be talking about some best practices for the CV and for the cover letter preparation for faculty job searches. We're going to be pretty discipline inclusive here. And so I'm going to speak kind of broadly about best practices across disciplines, but continue to encourage you to talk to your mentors, talk to other colleagues in your discipline to figure out what the conventions are for your discipline, because they're not going to be the same for everyone. There are some things that we can kind of that we can talk about as kind of overarching practices for the profession, but there are also some things that are disciplinary specific. We're going to think about how to prepare some templates for different types of faculty job ads. So to be clear, if you came to this workshop hoping that I would give you templates, I'm not going to do that. And there's a reason for that. Normally I would, but because the conventions around CVs and cover letters are so discipline specific, there's no template that I can give that would work for all of you. But we're going to talk about some of the core elements of CV and cover letters that you will be able to use to create your own templates so that you can kind of have some documents ready to go that you can recycle and adapt for the job ads that you're interested in. And then we're also going to talk about looking at the job ads and how to evaluate a job ad to tailor your CV and cover letter for those applications so that what you're sending out is targeted and you're not just sending out kind of generic CV cover letter applications, which are not going to land well with a search committee. So as I mentioned, nothing that I'm going to talk about today is going to be specific to your discipline. So I want to encourage you, after we leave the workshop today, after you have the recording and the slides as a reference, to go back to whoever your mentors are in your discipline, and the people that you know you want to connect with in your discipline. So doing some research about institutions where you're interested in finding a role, or people you know who have a faculty job in your disciplinary area. Look at their materials as examples of what you might also create. Okay, so let's start talking about the CV first. So the CV as the unsung hero of the faculty job application. I mentioned that the CV is a really, really important piece of your job application. It's kind of the base that you're going to build all of your other materials on top of. And I don't include this as a way to put pressure on you to, that you have to have a perfect CV. But just to spend a lot of time thinking about how you want to present yourself on your CV document, which is this comprehensive list of all of your academic achievements, and really putting a lot of thought and care into it, because this is how you're representing yourself as a scholar when you apply for jobs. So, there's no such thing as a perfect document. But there are some intentional decisions that you can make about how you present the work that you've done to other academics in your field. So here again, I'm just excerpting this article from the Chronicle about the rhetoric of the CV. And throughout this presentation, I'll have some resources linked that you can consult as kind of continued reference as you put together your documents right? They're not templates, but they're kind of guides to best practices for how you create your documents. So again, highlighting here that the CV is the most frequently and closely read of all the documents that candidates send. So it's probably the first thing that a hiring committee will look at when they're reviewing your portfolio as a candidate. If you're called in for an interview, which I hope that you all are, if you get in the door for an interview, that's what the search committee will have as a reference as they are talking to you and asking you questions. So it's really the place to think about how you want to present yourself and spend some time really curating it well. Okay, so how do we create a strong CV? So first of all, this first bullet point is really important, that the CV should be comprehensive. So this is where a CV, an academic CV, and a resume, a professional resume, really differ. Because on a resume for an industry job, for example, you're going to kind of pick and choose what you're going to include there that is relevant to the position. On a CV, you're not going to do that. You're going to include everything that you've done with an asterisk there. There are some positions like for me, my background is in the humanities, and so there are positions like public humanities work, digital humanities work, where there's some gray area between what is considered scholarly work and what isn't, and that will depend on the job. So there might be some things that I leave off my CV because they wouldn't be considered part of an academic portfolio for one position versus another. But for the most part, everything that you have done from your graduate work forward should be on your CV. It's all of your scholarly activity, okay? And it should be really clear. So each entry should tell the person reading your CV exactly what you did, when you did it, and what your contribution was to whatever that project was. If it was a conference presentation, we want to know what your role was. If it was a publication, we want to know what your authorship status was or any other contributions that you made. And it's also a chronological document. So it should present a timeline of your development as a scholar. So even though you might move some sections around in your CV, all of the entries should be entered from most recent at the top to the oldest. So again, somebody reading your CV at a glance will see what is the most recent thing that you have done, right? And then they can look back to see kind of where you've come from and what you've done in the past. But they're really going to be the most interested in what you're doing now, and because that is the most relevant to the next position for which you will apply. You should also, even though you're going to include everything on there and you're not going to be removing information the way you would for like a resume, there is some tailoring and editing that you do on the CV or the institution for which you're applying. And so an example of this is that if you are applying for, say, a more teaching focused institution, right, you want to front load your teaching experience on your CV because you know that that is going to be the information that is most relevant to the department that's reviewing your materials, right? Conversely, if you're applying for a job at a research institution, your research should be foremost on your CV, right? And you should spend some time really getting to know the institution and the department that you want to apply for to understand what their priorities are in order to prioritize that information on your CV. And so how do you do that? You're going to do that through the subheadings, right? Even though the information within each subheading is going to be listed chronologically, you have some control over what are the kind of blocks of information that are going to appear on your CV. So, and those include like your education, your teaching experience, courses you've taught, research and publications, conference presentations. These are all kind of pieces of this jigsaw puzzle. And your job is, once you've decided what goes in each of those sections, to figure out for each job, for each application, how are those pieces going to fit together in a way that the person on the other end reading it makes the most sense to them and has the most impact on their review of your application. There are some formatting guidelines that are discipline specific. So again, I encourage you to do some research and find some examples of CVs in your discipline. So that could be a CV from your faculty mentor, right, who you know has a faculty position in your discipline. Um, you could look at institutions and departments where you're applying, because most faculty members will have a website or a faculty profile page where their CV will be listed on their page, and you can kind of check it out and see how they've set up their CV and kind of, mimic their style, their format. Um, and I would prioritize and have preference for examples of people who've been recently on the job market. So, your mentor might be very helpful in helping you figure out your CV, but if the last time that they were applying for a job was 30 years ago, things might have changed since then. So you want to look at colleagues in your discipline who have faculty jobs and hopefully have been recently on the market, because those are the conventions that you'll want to be following. And then also keep in mind that there are formatting differences, not just by discipline, but also internationally. So if you are somebody who's applying for international jobs, do a little research and get to know what the expectations are in the country where you're applying, to see if there's anything different there that you just need to keep in mind. So again, just emphasize the most relevant information for your application for that institution. That means not what's relevant to you personally, but what's relevant for the search committee that you're going to be putting your materials in front of, what's relevant for that department. And usually a look at their website and a careful read of the job ad will be able to tell you that. Always prioritize the kind of higher impact research experiences that you've had. So in your publications, you want to make sure it's really clear which peer-reviewed publications that you've had. If you've had prestigious fellowships, you want to make sure that you're front-loading that information, right? Because those are going to be the most impactful aspects of your CV, and you want to make sure those are really front and center. So as you're moving those pieces around the jigsaw puzzle to showcase your work, your scholarly work, understand that those are going to be the kind of higher value, higher impact experiences. And here's another important one. In this new age of AI, be careful to include keywords from the job ad as you're putting together your CV. So this will be another aspect of tailoring your CV and your cover letter for particular job ads. More and more institutions are adopting kind of algorithms that screen applications to kind of help sort through these huge amounts of applications that each position receives. And so you will have a better chance of kind of getting through those screening processes if you are speaking directly to the job ad that you have. So while it's great to have kind of a template for your CV and a running document that you keep as kind of your notes of everything that you want to have on your CV, as you're tailoring a specific CV document for a job ad, look at the language that they use in the ad itself and see where you can add some of those keywords, right? And see where you can mimic some of the language in your CV and in your conversation on your CV about your work, because that will kind of move you through those algorithms should they exist. And then importantly, you want to focus on your CV on your graduate and postgraduate research if you have a postdoc. So you don't need to tell us everything that you did in high school or even in your undergrad unless you had a significant research experience in undergrad. You can list that, but really you're focusing on your graduate work and forward. Okay. So as I mentioned, just some strategies for preparing your CV. Look for examples of other scholars in your field and what their CVs look like. Most people put them up on their website now, so it's really easy to find. And you could even, if there's somebody who you're really interested in working with, for example, or you've connected with through a networking opportunity and they're helping you find jobs, you can ask them to look at their CV and see if they'll share it with you as an example of how they format things. Most people are CVs are public documents, so most people are very happy to share them. And then I'm gonna share some kind of, do's and don'ts here in this presentation, but I also wanna direct you to two very helpful resources that you can use as a reference moving forward. So one is, there's a blog called The Professor is In, which is a very helpful blog where the writer, Dr. Karen, talks about various aspects of academic life, including being on the job market. And so her rules of the academic CV are very, very comprehensive and very, very helpful. So I would recommend checking those out. And then the Chronicle of Higher Ed also has done quite a few articles on CV and job search preparation. So they have a do's and don'ts article that I think is really helpful as well. So I link them here, and we'll share, of course, the slides afterwards after this workshop, and you'll be able to check those out as well. Then make sure that you are getting other eyes on your CV. Ask somebody that you trust, somebody in your field, to review your CV and suggest any edits that pop out at them. You could have, if you and your peers are going on the market together, you could share CVs and have a kind of a group editing session. You could share it with your mentor, really anyone else that you trust to kind of put some eyes on it and give you feedback would be great. I'm happy to do that for anybody here. If you want to reach out to me after the workshop and just, share your materials with me, I'm happy to give you my feedback with the asterisks that I'm not in your discipline. So, take that for what it's worth. And I shouldn't be the only person looking at your materials, but I am happy to give my kind of gloss of what in terms of formatting and best practices. And so also, even though your materials should be very, very, very tailored to the job that you're applying for, it's a great idea to keep just a running kind of Google Doc. That is your master CV document that you make copies of and adapt for those job ads, because there's a lot of information. And the further you get in your career, the more information you're going to have to keep track of. So just have a running document, keep track of everything that you do, every conference, every publication, every course that you teach, and have it kind of have a kind of base document that you can copy and reiterate as needed. I've been doing this for a few years, where I just it's part of my habit that I have my CV document, and every time I go to a conference, I have a note on my calendar to just update my CV afterwards. I just kind of get into the habit of continuously updating it, so that when I am thinking about another opportunity or applying for, funding or something like that, I don't really need to think too hard about, oh my gosh, what did I do? How do I remember what I did 6 months ago? Because it's already right there for me. And you could also, in addition, have kind of two versions of your CV that you continuously update. One that prioritizes your research experiences for research institutions, and one that prioritizes teaching for teaching-focused institutions, if that is where you're aiming your search. Still, you're going to have to do some tailoring for those institutions specifically, but it's great to have those kind of core templates that the kind of formatting is mostly set, and so you have a place to start there. And then this seems like a small thing, but it actually is a big deal. Make sure when you're sending out your job applications, and this is not just for your CV, but for all of your materials, convert it to a PDF file before you send it out. So I've been on both sides of the hiring committee for academic and non-academic positions. And I will tell you that it says something about your kind of polish and your professionalism when you attach a PDF document versus a Word document or something else with your application. And then also, when you set it as a PDF, that preserves the formatting. So since the formatting is really the language of the CV and is how we are curating our work as a scholar for someone else to see, we want to make sure that we preserve that as it's being sent along. So converting it to a PDF keeps all of those formatting changes that you've made, and just makes it look really much nicer. And also avoids any kind of platform issues if you're sending on files. So just a suggestion there. Okay, and then here are, again, really recommend you look at those two resources for like all of the kind of nitty gritty of how you might format your CV. But just some additional thoughts that I think are worth mentioning. So for postdoc positions, normally the heading to list those would be under professional appointments. And then if you have a TA-ship or adjunct teaching experience, that would fall under a specific teaching section. And similar with research experience, make sure that your research experience is broken out from those other things. And even though a postdoc is research experience, that those really should be in their own section. And then I mentioned, public-facing scholarship and any work that is, arguably non-academic or quasi-academic. Think about whether it's relevant to the position and include it only if you feel that it is. I have a couple of articles that are more kind of more for like a popular audience that sometimes, depending on the position that I've looked at, I include those, and sometimes I take them off because I don't think they'll be regarded as academic work for that institution and for that department. So use your discretion there. And then also make sure that you're breaking out publications by type. So in my field, the monographs are common. So you separate out like a journal publication from a monograph. But other types of publications, make sure that they are kind of subdivided, so somebody looking at your CV can really see kind of where you've published and what you've done. Similar for forthcoming or in progress work. If you have stuff that's out but hasn't yet been published, make sure that's clear and separated out. And this is a really important piece and something that we'll talk about as we move forward to think about cover letters. But especially if you're a graduate student moving out into the market, or even as a postdoc, an early career postdoc, remember that you're presenting yourself in your job application as a future colleague, right? You're introducing yourself to people who might be your colleagues for many, many years to come. So just do a little bit of a mindset shift if this is challenging for you, to stop thinking about yourself as a student, and really think about what is the value that you're bringing to this department and how can you communicate that clearly, right? What's the kind of colleague that you would like to have, and how can you show in a document what that looks like? And so that's a good segue for us to start talking about the cover letter. Okay, so where your CV is the kind of repository of all of this information of what you've done, the cover letter is the narrative, the story that you're going to tell about why you've done the work that you've done and what your plans are for the future, right? So this is the conversation that you're going to start with your potential future colleagues about what you have to offer to their department and how you hope to work with them and within their institution. And here I excerpted Jennifer Furlong and Stacy Hartman have a few articles in the Chronicle about putting together a really persuasive job application, which again is linked here. But I think they capture the difficulty of writing cover letters very, very well. So for early career academics, what makes writing cover letters really challenging is that you're writing about the future. You're writing about who you are if you get this position, right? So where your cover letter, your CV, sorry, is where you are talking about what you've done. Your cover letter is where you talk about what you will do, right? And so both of those can be challenging to think about in different ways at the beginning of your career. But you want to really lean into that promise of the cover letter and, really kind of sell yourself to potential future colleagues that as a faculty member alongside them. So as you are crafting your cover letters, some things that you could keep in mind are, again, telling the story of yourself as a scholar, right? Both of who you have become, right? What are the experiences that have shaped you as a scholar? And then who you will become as a faculty colleague, what you see your research and teaching and service as offering to potential jobs in the academy. Very important to carefully edit your cover letter. If you have, this is where having another pair of eyes on your materials can be really helpful. Those like typos and grammatical issues can really be glaring in a cover letter, right? And really interrupt the flow of that story that you're trying to tell. So do whatever proofreading you need to do to make sure that those don't come through. And that also, it speaks to your attention to detail as well. And as with the CV, even more in the cover letter, you should be responding directly to the needs of the institution. You should show that you've done some research about the institution to which you're applying and the department to which you're applying. So read the job ad very, very carefully, and also go on, at the very least, go on the website, read about the institution and their mission, and take a look at their course catalog and their academic offerings and programs, and understand where the department fits into that institution overall and what their priorities are. So do some work to look at their website, maybe do some tracking of people through LinkedIn or other channels, but make sure that you show in your cover letter that you've done some homework to understand what the job is and what the institution is. You don't want to do too much of that. You don't need to give a book report about the institution and their mission statement, but you should show that you understand how you and your portfolio of scholarship fits with the priorities of the institution and department, and you should make that very clear as concisely as you can. You should be sure to talk about your research and your promise as a researcher, as well as your promise as a teacher. And your emphasis on both of those things, again, like the CV, is going to depend on what the priorities of the institution are. So again, this is where you show that you've done your homework, right? If it's a research institution, you're going to talk about most of the stress in your cover letter is going to be about your promise as a researcher. If it's a teaching focused institution and you are leading off in your cover letter talking about all of the research you've done and all of the research you plan to do and all the grants you plan to get, all that stuff is great and is really speaks to your value as an academic, but it's not going to be a right fit with the institution. So you want to really be sensitive to that and understand that their priority, if it's a more teaching focused institution, is going to be whether you can teach within their department, and kind of cover their catalog. And so that's the question that you want to answer for that search committee as they're reviewing your materials. And again, in your cover letter, because you've already attached your CV, which is that comprehensive record of your scholarship, you don't need to be as comprehensive in your cover letter. You should only include the information that is relevant to the position for which you're applying. So don't kind of recap your CV, and because they've already read that, they already have all of that information, but use your cover letter as an opportunity to highlight the aspects of your CV that are really important to this particular position and will have a high impact on the hiring committee that's reviewing your materials. Okay. So I started off by saying I wasn't going to give you a template. And so this is not a template because, again, I think you should look for examples that are more specific to your discipline, but it is kind of a roadmap to the anatomy of a cover letter so that you have a sense of where all of these pieces of information might go. So and these are kind of, this is inclusive of all disciplines. These are some kind of best practices that will stand you in good stead regardless of the field that you're in. So first and foremost, you really should be using institutional letterhead. So if your current position is at Stony Brook, then you should be, there are Stony Brook letterhead examples available in Google Drive. You should grab one and use that for your cover letter materials. Not only does it speak to where you are situated in your current position, but it also gives a lot of kind of polish to your materials, right? It shows that you are kind of firmly rooted in an academic tradition and, not just kind of sending things off. So really highly recommend that you use institutional letterhead for your cover letters, as well as a font that is professional and easy to read. So You could use like Times New Roman is great, any kind of serif font, versus something like Arial or Helvetica, right? You want to kind of avoid those because they're a little bit more on the casual side, right? A cover letter for an academic job position, an academic job is much more professional. It's much more kind of business oriented than other forms of writing that you might do. So make sure that you're using, some kind of clear, easy to read font, preferably a serif font. Um, and as with like a formal business letter, you're going to start off with a salutation that is something like "Dear Search Committee," "Dear committee members." Um, you know, uh, if they give you more specific information in the job ad, you might include that in the salutation. But "Dear Search Committee" should be fine for just about anything you send out. And then you will probably do the most work in this introductory paragraph. Introductions are so hard because there's so much weight to them. It's like this is where everybody who's reading your application is going to get their first impression of you. So don't let that freak you out. I know that there's kind of there's a lot of stress attached to that. But think of it as an opportunity. This is an opportunity for you to really tell your story and for you to tell the folks who are reading your materials exactly what you have to offer and why they should hire you. So make it clear what position you're applying for. Um, and be careful if you do have a kind of template document that you're adapting for different institutions, make sure you update that, because I will say that as someone on the hiring committee, I've gotten cover letters that have listed another institution or another position. And that kind of right off the bat will kind of disqualify you in terms of your attention to detail and your seriousness about the position. So make sure you make it really clear that the position you're applying for is the position that you really want. And then think about, hopefully through this process of putting together your CV and writing your cover letters and kind of thinking about where you've been as a scholar and what you've done already and what you want to do in the future, you have a sense of what your identity as a researcher is. You have a sense of what your goals are, what your strengths are, right? And so this introductory paragraph is a place for you to put these two pieces together. So for you to speak directly to the job ad and the institution where you're applying and tell them exactly how you, specifically you as a scholar, are a good fit for their department or for their institution. So you want to be really clear in answering that question and that introductory paragraph. And that's kind of your thesis statement for this paragraph or for this document. And your body paragraphs will be offering evidence to support that assertion. So in moving forward to your body paragraphs, you'll talk about your research, you'll talk about your teaching, again, prioritizing those different areas depending on the institution. But you'll be talking about how your research shows how you as a scholar fit this position and where you've been and what you plan to do. And same with teaching and same with any service, institutional service that you've done. And you may also, I added a note here about public scholarship. Again, if you feel that is relevant to the position, you can include that later on after you've discussed your research and teaching. And so as you talk about your research, you want to give a really succinct statement of your research interest, a current project that you're working on. Again, don't just repeat everything that's in your CV, but talk about kind of why you are interested in the research that you've done, what motivates you, what inspires you about your research. And then what your promise is. What are your future goals? What are your publication plans? What other funding sources might you pursue? And think about the larger questions that you're engaging with in your field, because that's what your search committee will want to know. And that's where you might need to sit and do some thinking, because maybe you're not in the habit of writing about that or speaking about that. But this is actually really good practice for the next round of the job search process, which is the interview process. Once you are kind of able to answer these questions about your academic identity, who you are as a scholar, and then how you're engaging with larger questions in your field, you'll be able to talk about those things much more readily and really impress a search committee during an interview. And then in your discussion of teaching, talk briefly about what you've taught, but more specifically how you've taught it. This isn't, again, you're not going to just list all the courses that you've taught previously. And most applications will ask you to also attach a teaching statement, which will be covered in a future workshop in this series. But you want to talk a little bit about to show that you have done some thought about pedagogy, that you've tried some kind of strategy in the classroom to make your teaching more effective. And then talk about what you would like to teach, especially for a teaching focused institution. And especially if they list specific courses that they need covered in the job ad, do some work to understand what you bring to the teaching in that department. Look at their course catalog, get a sense of what they need covered, and then what you might be interested in teaching, what courses you might be interested in proposing, and show again here that you've done your homework to think through that. And you get bonus points if you talk about handling technology and diverse learning in your teaching, because that's what every institution and every department is trying to figure out right now. So if you can show that you can help them answer those questions and bring some new strategy to those kind of challenges of teaching, you'll really be in good stead. And then finally, I hate writing concluding paragraphs. I find them so difficult to write. But in your final paragraph, that's where you want to kind of leave the impact of your cover letter. So again, you want to say that you're interested in the position and tell them again how you fit in as a unique candidate in their department, and how you would contribute as a colleague. So really leave them with a sense of what it would be like to work with you as a fellow faculty member. And then make sure that they have your contact information readily available on the cover letter so that they can contact you for an interview, hopefully, which I hope everybody here has that experience. Okay, so just like with your CV, you want to have a template for a cover letter, where you have kind of you've worked out kind of what you want to say about yourself as a scholar. You've worked out what you want to say about your research and your teaching. And that doesn't mean that you won't adapt these for different job applications. And again, you might want to have a research-focused cover letter template and a teaching-focused cover letter template. But it's helpful to kind of have some language at the ready, because once you get into the weeds of applying, and maybe many of you here have already had this experience, you need to kind of turn these documents around pretty quickly. So having some language ready to go that you've already had somebody look at, you've already had some input on, can be really, really helpful to kind of move that process along. And just be careful to highlight sections in those templates that you want to tailor for specific jobs, because again, you don't want to have another institution's name on your cover letter if you're applying to a job. And you want to know kind of where the work, what are the core pieces of the cover letter that you want to carry forward, and where the work is that you'll need to do for future applications. And then, as I said before, proofread really, really carefully, right? You don't want to have, typos there. You don't want to have, something that you didn't update from a previous application. You want to make sure that your sentences flow well. It's going to say a lot about you as a professional and as a scholar, if you just have done that extra step of proofreading. And again, convert to a PDF before sending, for all of the reasons that I mentioned before. It just looks more polished and ensures that your formatting that you've thought so carefully about is carried forward as you're sending out your materials. Okay, so that's kind of an overview of the CV and cover letter and best practices. And I wanted to leave some time for any questions that you all might have, and some discussion about where you all are in your processes.
Molly, thank you so much for this workshop. This has been really fantastic. We did have a couple of quick questions in the chat. First one is, and I believe it will be okay, you'll be able to share the slides with the group. So
Yes, of course.
if you send them to Diane and I will make sure that all the participants receive them.
Okay.
Somebody, Yashlal asked, what about research teaching and service in a master's degree right before a PhD? That was on the resume component. And their second question was, what about significant national, international level achievements in undergrad? Would those be items to include?
I would say so for the first question, definitely in a master's program, I would include at master's is a graduate level. So absolutely, I would include that. And I don't think you even need to, if it's research that's listed in the your research experience session, you don't need to specify that it was done as part of a master's program. It's just part of your graduate research experience. Um, and they'll probably be able to see kind of chronologically as you list your degrees, kind of where that fell. For undergrad, generally you want to stick to graduate experiences, but as I said, like if you got a really awesome fellowship or scholarship or had a really significant research experience as an undergraduate, I do think that you could list that. You certainly want that is part of your research record, and you want to make sure that that is clear.
Thank you, Molly. Additional question, Catherine asks about letterhead, Stony Brook letterhead. We'll include that in our follow-up email with the slides. And then Catherine asked another question. She asked, I have a question about bullet points on a CV. Do you recommend putting bullets under each appointment to describe what you did in each position like you would on a resume? Or should you just list your appointments and let your publications speak to your skills?
So is that specifically related to like a postdoctoral appointment, or are you referring to the section of where you have your publications and you want to talk about your role in the publication?
Molly, I'm just gonna unmute. Specifically the appointments. Like I have right now on my CV, I feel like it's a lot more resume style, and I have been able to get a few faculty interviews with that style. But I was looking at some candidates' CVs that SOMOS brought in earlier this year, and they definitely just had like lists of their appointments and didn't really like list sort of like what specifically they did in each appointment, and just had a list of publications. So I was curious, just sort of your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So I would certainly give preference, like if you have examples in your discipline that don't do that, I would lean that way because you want to kind of follow the conventions of your field. But I don't think it would hurt your application if you had, let's say you had a really significant um, kind of leadership opportunity in a professional appointment, to give a little bit of detail around that. I would be very, very concise if you do decide to do that, because you don't want to have like a paragraph, right? But maybe a sentence or two about something really significant that you worked on as a postdoc. But also if a publication resulted from that work, then I think that the publication could also speak for that. And if that is what you're seeing as the convention in your field, that's what I would lean toward.
Yeah, I wasn't sure about that because I don't want to like force a search committee to go read all of my papers to determine what skills I have. And there's also sort of a lot of not necessarily soft skills, but like other specialized skills for my field that don't necessarily come across in a publication, that I wasn't sure like where to sort of highlight those.
Yeah, and I that's really important to know. And that's again, I think part of um understanding the job ad and what's going to be important for that position. If you feel like the search committee is really going to want to know that you have those skills, you could even include that as another section of your CV where you have specialized skills listed to make it really, really clear to them.
Awesome.
Karen,
Thank you,
you have
Molly.
Karen, you have your hand raised.
I just wanted to mention something in connection to the question that was asked. And I know the focus here is more for academic positions, but for folks who would consider also applying for any kind of administrative roles, then that's when it becomes helpful to talk about some of the things you've done in other positions, which is a little different than when you're applying for an academic position. So I just thought I would contribute that.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for bringing that up.
Thanks, Carrie. And we have a couple of more questions in the chat, Molly, if you don't mind.
Sure.
The first one was, how long should a cover letter be? Are there good field-specific templates available anywhere?
So for the first question, I would say that for an academic cover letter, and again, this is not true for an industry cover letter would be shorter. An industry cover letter would be about 1 page, but an academic cover letter, I would say 1.5 to 2 pages would be kind of the space you need to include the information that's relevant and really, really tell that story again about yourself as a scholar. So that's what I would aim for. And then in terms of discipline-specific templates, I would really start asking around, see if your mentor can share one, see if you have peers and colleagues in your department who can share their materials, and then do some searching. More and more academics are on LinkedIn, and so you can find kind of links to their websites. That way, most people will have their CV on a website or a faculty profile page. Look at institutional websites and department websites at scholars that you maybe have cited in your field or are interested in your field, or a place where there's great work that you want to be part of that's happening, and just kind of collect a few examples to compare and contrast and see, are there things that they have in common? Are there things that they do maybe differently, but that you like and want to emulate? So I think that will be really helpful. And I also think that process of looking for those examples will also kind of give you a sense of what are the kinds of information that you want to make sure that you prioritize as you are developing the documents for yourself.
Great, Molly. Thanks so much for all this information. Would you mind asking your question coming off mute, because I got the second one. The first one, I think Molly and I may need a little bit of clarification on. It says, how about all the one-day scientific days in the universities? Well, PhD or postdocs, are these included?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Aya.
Yeah, when we talk about adding all the scientific work that is done, there are a lot of those one day, probably a short conference scientific days that maybe we would contribute through an abstract, through a poster. Are they worth including the CV?
So I would say if you are presenting, right, or contributing a poster, I would list those as in your kind of conferences that you've attended, and just, be clear about what your role was there, right, that you did a poster or that you did a presentation. And you can also in that section kind of specify the kind of opportunity that it was. So you'll give the name of what it was, and you can you can specify that it was a one-day research conference or other kind of opportunity. If you feel like you have quite a few of those and that they're substantially different from, like a scientific meeting in your field, you might think about breaking them out into another section. And those would probably be below the kind of more high profile meetings in your field, but you could still list them certainly, because they are examples of your scholarship and your contributions.
Yes, thank you. And the second question was, you mentioned a subtitle of professional appointments. Would that be including academic experience and research experience, or is those better to list separately? Or would it be like, what is the best way? Should it be just professional appointments and everything, all the appointments under there? Or should it be maybe a subtitle professional appointments and then a subtitle academic and research? Or what would you suggest?
So the professional appointment subtitle I was referring to earlier is specifically for a postdoctoral position. So you know that would be your postdoc position. If you had other kind of professional positions within an institution or that were relevant to the job, that they would fall under there. But I think for most folks here, it would be the postdoc, or if you've had more than one postdoc. And then the research experience section would be separate from that, and that's where you would list your publications, and then conferences, other forms of anywhere that you're communicating your research findings in your field. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yes, maybe in our case it's a little mixed because the ERECTA program is the postdoc itself has a research and an academic component.
Yeah.
So two components within postdoc.
Yeah.
That's why probably maybe we might end up separate them even under the professional appointments, because still that's the experience that we're getting from the postdoc. Half of it is academic, half of it is research.
Yeah, I think I mean, again, look at I would see other examples in your field at kind of how other folks handle this, but my sense of that would be that the position itself is the appointment, and the research experience is the outputs. So as with another kind of postdoc, if you have the role itself and then you have the publications that ensue, those are things that you would represent separately because you want to make them very clear. And similar for like teaching experiences, those would be broken out separately because it's kind of an output of that professional appointment.
Thank you. Now I have what to do. Thanks.
Are there any other questions? And please feel free to take yourself off mute if you'd like to ask a question as well. I do want to remind everyone before we jump off that we have several other sessions coming up in terms of the faculty career path. We have 3 other workshops scheduled. The first one is June 12th, and that'll be on teaching statements. The second one is June 20th, diversity statements. And the third one is June 27th, research statements. We will share the link for RSVPs. The Zoom is the same for all 3 of those. So the same Zoom link that you use today will be the ones that you'll use for those as well. And once we send the follow-up email with the presentation, we'll send the letterhead template as well as the flyer for the next 3 workshops. We hope you'll join us for those as well. One last chance, if I just want to make sure we answered all of your questions.
I have a question.
Great. Go ahead, Joseph.
So I have a question. For example, is there a limit on how long a CV should be? And I'm worried, for example, if you have like over 50 publications, would anyone be interested in seeing that or reading that on your CV?
Yes. So again, unlike a resume, a CV is a comprehensive record of everything that you've done. So if you've got 50 publications, first of all, that is amazing. Well done. And you should list them all. And I mean, I've seen CVs that are like 30 pages from people who've been in the field for 25 years. So just keep adding to it, and well done.
Okay, thank you.
There was a comment.
I just want to follow up on that quickly. You might want to think about breaking those into maybe subsections if there are different kinds of publications, or like first author, like if you want to if you feel like some of those publications are more relevant than others or more impactful than others, you could think about breaking that into subsections to kind of help somebody navigate through that list. But don't take anything out, just keep it all in there.
There's also a suggestion in the chat by Dr. Michelle Juarez to use PubMed, and you could use a PubMed link to list your publications as well.
Oh, okay. So, okay, that's cool.
Michelle, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so PubMed, actually, you can create your own personal profile, and within that, they will generate a public link of all your publications that are in PubMed. So I, in my CV, list my most significant, like, top 5 publications. And then I say, to see all other publications, please, see this link. Because if I were to list all my publications, that would be way too much.
Thank you for that suggestion.
Yeah, you could do that with an organ ID as well too. I've seen those on CVs.
One quick question. Usually I've heard people say, in your first pages of your CV or resume, I don't know if it's related to resume or CV, you have to actually retain the attention of the hiring manager there in the first page of the resume, because they usually don't have that much time to look into the whole thing, because they have so many. So for this specific situation, what would be the best way to do that? Because they say sometimes they use 6 seconds to actually look at the something resume or a CV. So if it's not interesting from the 6 seconds, they will just throw it away. So what would be the best way to retain their attention in those 6 seconds? I mean, what is the strategy? What we have to put in the CV in order to do that?
Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm hearing your question correctly because the sound is a little faint. So you're asking, how do you kind of grab the attention of the search committee with your CV and cover letter so that you make it to the top of the pile? Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so I would say that the way you prioritize and articulate the information on both of those documents is what's going to make your application stand out. So again, doing a lot of that thinking and strategizing to be able to understand for yourself and then communicate to others, who are you, what do you have to offer and bring to the table, and how does it fit with the department and institution that you're applying to join? Get that really clear kind of in your mind, and maybe you want to do some drafts and think through it and talk through it with somebody before you actually start writing in your documents. But once that's really clear for yourself, then you're going to be able to express that in your materials. And so then you're going to be able to make decisions on your CV about what's the information that should be right at the top, what should be really, really clear, so that somebody looking at it in a glance, because they're reviewing 50 other documents, are really going to see that and have it stand out. And similarly for your cover letter, in that introductory paragraph where you answer that question about who am I as a scholar and how do I fit with this opportunity, if that's really clear in your introductory paragraph, which is the first thing that eyes are going to look at on the page, I think that will really do a lot to move your application forward.
Okay, thank you.
Any final questions? If not, thank you for joining us today. Molly, thank you once again for this fantastic presentation and information. As I mentioned, we have several other workshops that will be occurring in the next couple of weeks, and we will share all of those with you as well. Otherwise, have a wonderful day and enjoy the sunshine. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you all. These were great questions.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.